but a lot of times life happens and we're not able to deal with it and we're not able to find that balance. How were you dealing it with that at that point? How were you making it work?
It's really about how you think impacts your actions. You've got to see your progress. Don't measure it towards anybody else but yourself. Just set short-term goals, little goals, and achieve it and feel good about it, celebrate it, and then take it to the next level. Baby steps, and you will build. It will work. You just have to build over time. And a lot of women actually bloom artistically in their 40s and 50s. And I think that's why you see a lot of women's art kind of bloom later. But it does bloom. We do bloom. We do evolve. And it's not too late.
Welcome to the podcast, Holly. How are you?
I'm good. So great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Same here, same here. You have this incredible work. I saw your work. I've seen your work quite a couple of times, and we wanted to bring you on the podcast. And your work is as stunning as one can say. I love the textures, the colors, and I think the organicness of your work, to be honest. But I want to talk about that. But before that, I also want to talk about a lot of things that I found about you. And then I read more about you and learned more about you. We're recording this episode at 2 a.m. right now. And from what I can understand, your 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. is your studio hours. And you have a day job and you paint throughout the week in during the night, isn't it?
Yes, that's accurate. Yeah, I have a full-time day job, and my best hours for making artwork are before I go to work in the morning.
Wonderful. So a lot of artists feel handicapped, and I would include myself in that too, because sometimes I feel like I have too much on my plate. I have so many things to do that often, um, I miss out, and I feel like, oh, I'll do this once I have time, and I'll do this once, I get there, or I feel more stable, or like, if I have like all of those reasons, and I know that when I read about you and I was like, this is calling out on all of our excuses. Can you talk me through about this idea? How did you come up to this? And a lot of times a very general attitude amongst all of us is like, I have a full-time job. How do I make art? Probably I'll make on weekends. But going this extra mile and having this routine and putting your hours, did you like, were you always like this, or did you land up here with like a sequential incident we don't know about yet?
Well, so I think it's a great question and something a lot of people ask me. To be honest with you, I learned this by I used to be a shift scheduler in a medical ER, and I would schedule all the residents and the medical students. And as I put the schedules together, I realized that people were coming into work at 11 o'clock at night and they left work at 7. And some people came at 3 and they left at 11. So I learned about the swing shift, the graveyard shift, and I figured if they can get up and do this and come into a hospital and care for acutely ill patients, I think I can get up at and go migrate a few feet to, because my studio is in my house. I have that is helpful if you can work in your home. And I just go a few feet next door and get to work. And it's my protected time to actually focus. And I do really want to work every day to keep the conversation going with my practice. So that is why I do that.
Wonderful. And when did you start doing this? How long has it been for you?
I would say I've been doing this for more than a decade.
My God. So for almost a decade, you have been working at 2 to 6.
Yeah, yeah, and it's been really good. And with the pandemic, there's more of an opportunity for remote work, so that has also worked well for me.
Wow. And tell me something. And then when do you go to your day job? What does that look like for you?
My day job is 8 to 5. So I have an MFA in art, but I also have an MBA in finance, and I do finance during the day, and I do HR. And I work at a university, in a community-based organization, and I support their efforts I do contracting and, good old bread and butter kind of stuff like budgets and things like that.
But that is interesting. I think um, this is this is such a nice combination of you. Once you have, I think, a lot of artists and people who either have come from art schools, and people who didn't come from an art school. I think there's this two contrasts. A lot of people who came from art school, they felt like they came with a skill set, but a lot of time they didn't come from the business side. They didn't know how to navigate the career. They knew how to make art, but they didn't know how the skills that it required to navigate a career. Versus a lot of artists who feel like they have figured out how to navigate a good career, but they struggle with taking their art, conceptually and technically and skillfully to the next level. So I think, like, this is a very wholesome combination for you, isn't it?
I mean, I think so. I think a lot of people would think it odd, but it draws really from the feminist perspective of having a room of one's own, of being able to make your money. For me, as a young woman, it was really important to earn a living because I felt that it demonstrates, your ability to kind of own your own methods of production and to be able to pay for your stuff. And one of the ways, I had a mentor in business years ago. She had been a bonds broker on Wall Street. And I just remember that she was like, look, you're not stupid. You can learn math, you can learn finance. Because I had a lot of stuff in my head about what women did or didn't do. And so that was kind of the pathway. Now, I ultimately didn't want to make my whole life about finance, but it was a good foundation for me to actually grow confidence.
So tell me something. While you were young, we all have these notions that we either pick up from our surroundings. For people, we see people how things are done. I remember I did not come from an art school, and I'd run a business. I had been working in business, and I'm doing that the same thing today, but I think very different approaches. I'm way more comfortable with who I am now. But at that point, when I wanted to enter into the arts, um, in the beginning, I felt like, um, I remember, so I come from a design school. I didn't come from an art school, but I'd always been creating. So I remember people where I used to work, and it was like a co-working setup. And I've shared this story a million times on the podcast. And they would tell me, "Oh, you." So they wouldn't. So they would. Okay, so this is an illustrator, and this is a designer. This is a this, and this is a fine artist. So I always felt this bottled in a bottle that I didn't want to be. So I kept on this fight. Okay, maybe if I do not do enough of this, if my work does not look enough figurative, if my work does not look enough illustrative, so maybe I'll feel like an artist. Like, and it sounds so bizarre now to myself, even when I say this. But to be honest, that was what I felt at that point. And that is what people around me were also, these boxes were being put, like, oh, this is a commercial artist, oh, this is sellout artist, oh, this is. So a very typical idea was like, what's been sold for so many years is a real artist, a successful artist, someone who's sitting quietly in the studio, who's not active on social media, or who, like, everything comes to their door. And like, so, it pulls us, this whole facade that's been built for years. But once we are naive and young, we often, a lot of us, buy into it. And then we figure us, like, it's every layer drops down. What was it for you while you were young, and, like, figuring your path and decided, okay, this is what you want to do?
So I think that that's a really great distinction because like a lot of kids, I like to draw. I did go to I went to a BFA and MFA, and it was certainly drawing based, at least initially. However, I studied new genres at the San Francisco Art Institute, which was very much about interdisciplinary practice, which included video and performance and more conceptual bases of sculpture. However, what it did not include was fiber art in any significant way back then. And fiber art has always been very much, if you did fiber art, there was this sort of notion that you were a craftsman. And for me, I don't, I've done both, and I continue to make both paintings, drawings, and fiber installations. And I don't see it as, well, this is fiber and this is fine art, because I think we really damage our own creative process when we see these sort of fake distinctions. And some of this is a very gendered response to things that, well, if you're working with fabric, that's craft.
Absolutely. I felt this so many years. My mom, because I come from, so I studied fashion design and I'd always wanted to be a fashion designer. And, growing up, I grew up in India. So I grew up a lot, around a lot of culture in the sense of textiles and fabrics. And like, they were they were like a very natural instinct for me. And when I started to get into it, and I'd always been doing it and I'd always enjoyed, but the moment I felt i I wanted to become an artist because I wanted to feel creatively more expanded, more free, more liberated. But when I actually started went on to that path, I realized that it isn't it's capping me so much that I started becoming conscious of who I was. So I want, like, okay, fine, if painting is more of an art versus, oh, this is craft, because my inclination was always towards fabrics and textiles and embroideries, and that was crafty. And crafty means, um, in our culture, women sew and men become athletic. It's like a very gender norm kind of a thing. So, how we confuse ourselves with these things, and we want to fit in those. I think consciously, we also want to fit on those boxes that define us. And it is not often the boxes coming to us, it is us going to that boxes. Okay, I want to fall into this box of being an artist. Let me check what it needs and let me tick those off.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that. I think that, I was definitely set up to follow sort of the white male conceptual artist, sculptor, blah, blah, blah. And then I found, as I looked deeper, I found this whole alternative history of art making, of second wave feminism, and a lot of women that were working extensively in textiles. And of course, a lot of Indian women artists now in contemporary art are completely knocking it out of the park, and are a huge presence, certainly in the contemporary American art world. So there is an alternative history that is flowing in, and it's an amazing time to be a woman artist. So to me, it's one of the best times now. I know there's a lot of barriers that we can talk about in terms of trying to get your work out there, and there are a lot of people working in this space, but it's also a great time to bring everything in, everything that you are creatively.
Blurring those boundaries, no longer having the definition of what is art, what is not, how you can fit in. You can truly be yourself and um, project and create what's calling for you. And I think it's far more fluid than it ever was.
Absolutely. It's a great time.
So tell me something. What was the mindset and how were you, did you always want to become an artist while growing up? Were you exposed to the arts? How had, like, all of this manifested for you?
Well, I think like a lot of people that start out in the arts, there's usually some relative in the family that, painted or drew. My mother's father and her brother were both artistic. None of them, well, her brother was a commercial artist, and her father was, he worked for a railroad, but he painted and drew on the side. And from that basis, I did end up, studying art at an early age, went to art school. But when I got out of art school with my MFA, of course, I was like, okay, so does that mean that I like work as a barista for the rest of my life? Like, how am I going to swing this? Because I started to think about, as a woman, you've got to be thinking about building wealth, investing in yourself, and the miracle of compound interest and all. I was starting to think about those sorts. You need to start investing in yourself early on to try to build a life. And it was something that I don't know that everybody was thinking about at the time, but I was thinking about it because I grew up really pretty poor. and I didn't want to go back there. So I went right into the workforce, but I was always making my work, and I was showing my work.
Yeah, it didn't mean this or that. It meant, I think that is another notion and a myth I feel like a lot of us need to more and more talk about is that, and I keep telling this to myself also, like there are seasons I've seen in my own work. Um, I play so many roles, and apart from our professional roles, also, I feel like we play so many roles. We have a family, we have friends, and then we have, you want to travel. And I feel like being an artist does not mean, like, I feel like a lot of my art extends beyond my studio, how I live my life, how, because it's a lot about me being a woman, my culture, and like, seeing that juxtaposition, my culture, how I talk, how other women talk, what am I feeling, and how the society makes, like, all of that. And even if it didn't have to, we all have a life that always inspires us. It truly gives us experience that we can document and we can get inspired by, but we need to have a life in a way that accommodates all of that is an extension all of that. And it cannot be that, we will only be a good artist that, okay, if I'm covering these hours in the studio, if I'm doing this, or even if I'm having the number of shows and like all of those things. And I feel like a lot of times we have this notion that we have to like have this one career goal. And I don't say that this wouldn't be like, it works for a lot of people and they are hyper focused, but for someone like me, I need a lot more in my life than just one thing, because I like to create in multiple formats, and I can't force myself into thinking, okay, now I'm a painter, I will get up every day and I will paint, and I get up tomorrow and I see a piece of fabric and I'm like, how do I use this? Or if I see something and I'm like, what can I do about this? So I behave like that. And in my own experience, I figured, like, it's like seasons, it's like phases. Like some days my job takes over, mm, what I'm doing, the podcast, the work, some other projects, they take over, and the time crunch for, let's say, my art is slightly crunchier, or I'm making it in a different way. Sometimes my studio space and my studio time takes so much over that everything else mellow down. And sometimes when life happens, I lost my mom. Sometimes somebody's getting married, someone has a child. Like there's so many life things that gives us time to, okay, now your creativity is in your mind, think with your mind, and like, I don't know. But I think we constantly value a lot of our worth with how much in real time we're creating, when what from what we expect, unless we're not making these large scale paintings and doing the installations and doing this, we're not doing good enough. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a real problem, that sort of either or thinking, and I'm sorry for your loss, by the way. Um, it is that sort of either or thinking. I'm either a mother, or I work in an office, or I'm an artist and I do nothing else but make this artwork. And really, especially for women, that's generally never something we can swing, because we are often caregivers, whether we're caregiving for our children, for older parents. Um, there there's a way in which women in particular are socialized to care for others. And so this sort of independent genius in the garret, who everybody champions, that person, that generally often is not our experience. We are spinning a lot of plates and I in the air, but I do think it's a strength. And I think if we can learn to build on that strength and to celebrate that we are diverse, that we learn in different ways, that we succeed in different ways, and stop seeing that as a deficit. I think that for me was where my life really shifted. I stopped seeing the fact that my background was not a straight line. I didn't just go from MFA to a teaching job to doing residencies all the time. No, that wasn't my experience. I worked a good solid 25 years in an office. It meant that I'm fast, I can multitask, I'm good with technology, reasonably so anyways. And those are gifts, and I've stopped looking at that as like wasting your life. No, you just had an alternative path. and I think it's owning your choices. That's what really releases the creative power, is owning your choices and not being ashamed of them.
I love that. I love every bit of what you said. And, I think this is a narrative that we need to switch on for ourselves a lot of times. Do you feel like there was a particular moment in your own life that, were you always as clear, as driven? But I'm sure which might not be, in most of the cases, because we all have our own confusions, and, but there are experiences and times where I feel like, okay, mm, something's happened. There's a shift I can feel in myself. Uh, a shift that brought this to life. Do you think there is something that you can point to?
Yeah, I mean, I got my MBA in finance in 2011, and I had taken some pretty high level jobs at the university, managing really, really large budgets. And I got to a point where I was like, I don't really want to work 10 or 12 hours a day on this job. I mean, it just, you kind of push yourself to a point where you realize that actually isn't what I want to be. I mean, that's a path, and some people do really well in these very, very large jobs. It turned out I wanted to have a little bit more of a normal job, a normal 40-hour job, and make my art and see where that was going to lead me. And once I followed my artistic path, it led me in a really, really nurturing place. I'm a few years away from retirement from my day job, and I feel like I'm in a really good spot where I've got a lot of studio activity going. I've got some good shows coming up, and I feel like I've I've found my balance. It took me a long time, and I think I had to push myself all the way in the opposite direction to realize that's not actually who I want to be. I really need to be an artist.
And what do you think was the element that was causing this disbalance? Do you think that while you were having the hard days, the unrest, what was that was what switched, what changed, what did you figure out that brought more balance to your life?
I think, I had pushed myself so hard. It was I was overseeing like millions of dollars, and I was just like, I don't, there's decisions you have to make at that level that can make you really uncomfortable. And that's part of significant business roles. And everybody, who's been in the business world knows you have to make hard decisions about people, about resources. And I didn't like who that was for me. And, I did develop an eating disorder. I became anorexic in my early 40s. And typically, this is a diagnosis that occurs with younger women. But I found that I was not eating and was losing more and more weight. And I finally got a diagnosis of anorexia and realized that, that one of the anorexia is one of those mental illnesses that if you don't address it, you can die. And I, it was a great teacher for me. And I think that really shifted me, that I needed to live my life in a way that was my own. I had established financial stability, I'd established a future, and I'd done that, but I didn't need to. You kind of have to know, yeah, you need to know when it's okay to turn around now and kind of live your path.
When was this?
I would say I'm 51 now. I was about 43 when I kind of was like, you know what? I think I need to turn the ship around. And the thing is, you can always choose something different. And I think a lot of people and women in particular think, well, I'm on this path. This is what I have to do for the rest of my life. And it's like, not really. You get to choose.
Yeah, and you are free to choose.
Yeah, I'm free to choose. And it doesn't mean that I ran off into the forest and decided to live on, twigs and berries. I continue to work to support, a job that's much more livable for me so that I can have a creative life.
What was happening while you had the other job? How were you balancing your creative energies and your creative aspirations? Let's say someone who's listening to this episode, maybe they are at a run where you are, where they want to and they have a job, but or a life. A lot of times I feel like mothers, caregivers, even though they are not like I think with jobs we still have an option if we can figure a financial way out and all of that. But a lot of times life happens and we're not able to deal with it, and we're not able to find that balance. How were you dealing it with that at that point? How were you making it work?
I think that number one, I did get some therapy, and I think anybody that is struggling with some major life stuff, talking to a well-trained, capable mental health provider is really helpful. Um, I think that that was really important, to sort of, you know, we did a course of cognitive behavioral therapy, which really emphasizes, I mean, I'm no expert, but it's really about how you think impacts your actions, not the other way around. Because a lot of people think, I feel this way because, you know, and it's actually a lot of it is I'm thinking myself into this kind of sort of emotional space. And so I had to retrain the way I was thinking. So therapy was really important. I also think setting boundaries, setting a schedule for what was going to be my day. So initially I didn't have all this time in the studio because I did have this really big job. So I started small and I said, all right, today I'm going to do an hour of artwork. I'm going to get up a little early and I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to commit that I'm going to have at least 20 minutes of exercise, um, so that I like am not completely like just dilapidated. You do, as you get older, you definitely need to exercise because you do get creaky. But I say start small. If you can only do studio practice for 15 to 20 minutes a day, do that. Um, but commit to that and feel good about that you did that. And I actually used to keep a little log and I'd write down my studio activity every day so I could look back on the week and see I did 28 minutes on Monday. I did 20 minutes on Thursday. On the weekend I did an hour on Saturday and Sunday. So I could see that I was making progress because it's important to look back and say, "Oh, here's where I was and here's where I'm coming." You've got to see your progress. Don't measure it towards anybody else but yourself. That's the real thing. Oh, I'm not in the studio 35 hours a week. So what? It doesn't matter. Measure yourself against your own progress. That's the goal.
That is some really incredible experiences. I have something that I also read while I was reading one of your interviews, and of course, really resonated with me because I think we have a similar experience. Uh, you shared about in your own practice. You also shared about um, how passing away of your mother has been a huge part of you growing up, and you seeing the domestic life, the quilts, and how she was a seamstresses. And then there was a particular line which really opened things up for me. Was, I think you said something around, once you have regret and once you overcome that guilt and regret, a lot of things unpack and a lot of momentum. Can you talk a little bit about how has why this experience has so much impact on you and your work, and how are you, because it's a lot of it is surrounded how you are processing your um art via these emotions. And I feel like for me also, my art shifted drastically, my whole perspective shifted drastically after losing my mom. um I think for the first year I just couldn't understand any bit of it. And and because I just think I was nowhere around even trying to heal. And then once I started my path on, I think, coming to terms, I think your body takes a shock, and then your body starts to come to terms, and then you realize, okay, this is what's happening. And then I started building association in my own practice, and and today my work looks very different. It has a very different vision. It has a very different purpose, and a lot of it has to do with her. And I feel like that's a that's something I read about your own experience. So I want to know about um, how has it been for you? You how is healing and trauma integrated into your work and your own personal experience, and how do you transpire it into your work?
Well, so because my mother had suffered domestic violence and then died of alcoholism when I was 15, I spent a lot of years being really angry about that. And, not, feeling very, very unsettled about it, feeling that the justice system had not protected her. Um, you know, and I think the laws, certainly in the United States, in the early 1970s, did not really recognize or understand the need for women to have a shelter and a safe space. And, so a lot of those things changed over time in the US. But I think that it, as a younger woman, a lot of my work was about reprocessing trauma. And I did a lot of political work, thinking about how rape is used as a tool of genocide and war. I thought about women in a sort of more geopolitical way. A lot of it was sort of very outside myself, because to actually go deep into what I was, sort of a lot of the things that had occurred, it was hard for me to process that directly. Um, and, I did spend a lot of years, trying to live the life of having a day job, and also my work not being particularly focused yet, because it was about domestic violence. It was about misogyny in a lot of ways, but I wasn't getting clearer in terms of my own sort of healing, because my healing wasn't there yet. I don't think my work really came into its own until I kind of was able to heal myself.
I think something that people really don't talk about often about death is, of course, there's grief. And I
Yeah.
never understood. But there's so much anger that one, like even today, it's going to be over 2.5 years, 2 years of my mom's passing. And I feel like there are so many moments of anger towards the person that you lost, anger towards uh, people who've never experienced those not loss. I honestly, and anger to yourself and anger on time. And there's so much anger that sometimes you just don't know that what do you do with it. And you have to, at some point you have to accept that anger, and you know that you'll I keep, like, even when I write in my own journal, there's so many times that I say that, you know what, I will always be angry, that you left, and that you left so early, and that, but I will have to be okay that I will be angry for this, and I understand even then, but there's also going to be this disappointment. But I think there comes this stage there that you understand, okay, this is going to be a reality, that you can be angry, and then you can heal, that it is again not this or that there can be a void, but you can continually try to heal that void also.
Yeah, and I think that, as you say, getting comfortable with, your feelings. I mean, another thing that's really important is being part of a community, whether you're in some sort of 12-step program or a support group, or other people in your, religious organization. Finding support with other people that have been, either have experienced what you've experienced or have some similar journey, that you can help talk through these things. Because I don't think that I got kind of clear about my life and was able to move on until I had sort of, you don't just jump from point A to point Z. You got to go through all that stuff along the way. I had to make a lot of really not great artwork, and really sort of struggle along until I got to a place where I was kind of comfortable with myself and could make my work and feel sort of situated myself, and get more confidence in my materials and more clarity. But I had to go through all those feelings along the way. And, some art is made in a state of rage and is amazing. I mean, I think of the painter Sutini, amazing. A lot of the abstract expressionists. I mean, there is an important place for rage in art. Uh, for me, I think my best work came from a place where I was able to channel it into mending, which is why I started to work with fiber.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that also? Something that you also specifically do is that you were a person of many medias. And I also read like um how you respond to different materials. And I think we also share a similar love for textiles and you do fiber art. But I want to ask you first, which is a little off the topic, but I still want to take that liberty. Is did you ever feel that you were doing? Because I think another inhibition that artists have, like, am I do dipping my hands in too many things? Am I trying to do too much? Should I be focusing on one or two or whatever that is? Or did you have those fears? And then how has your own work evolved into this, these beautiful installations today? Then you do these beautifully layered um, paperworks, and then these textures and these organic shapes, and you know it looks very unified. Like, even though there are several different mediums, they look very cohesive in the sense of, I think, sense of feeling. I think they all have a very similar feeling that I can see when I'm looking at your work.
Well, that's great to hear. I would say that I only discovered maybe about 6 months ago um, that, and I'll tell you how that happened. And this is actually really true. When an artist gets an opportunity to show in a solo show, which was a show that I had at Colorado State University at Fort Collins, the Kerfman Gallery, I I was like, I'm only going to show fiber work or I'm only going to show work on panel. And I was like, why? That is not, I made both in the last 3 years. And I was like, well, when you do a solo show, you're like, oh God, how am I going to have enough work to fill all this? You do that thing. And then you're like, well, that means that it's got to be all in. You've got to put everything that is a part of who you are. So I put my suspended drawing installations in the gallery with my LED lit fiber work that I was doing at the time, plus my drawings, my works on paper, and it looked really amazing. And I I was like, actually, that is the point. I'm not just a fiber artist, I'm not just a painter, I'm all those things. And it's no problem if you are singularly a painter or singularly a fiber artist. It's not like one's better than the other. As long as it's true to you. It's just that I, I'm kind of one of those women that I go in the kitchen, I'm like, well, I think I'm going to make a batch of cookies and maybe I'll throw a casserole in the oven and maybe I'll do this and that. No, I got to work on that spreadsheet and I got to call so that's how I am. That's how I think a lot of us are, and that's how I am in the studio. I'm not just one thing, and I embrace that now instead of trying to hide from that.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And can you talk a little bit about your work on how has that? I think I want to talk about two things. You've also spoken about your material a little bit, but two things. Conceptually, I think something that I am learning now is there's this really, where I think there's good things about certain things, there are also cons that come with it. I think we are typically so much trained, okay, what is my artist statement, what is this, what is that, what is my work about, what is my work about, and then we feel like, okay, this is my work, this is what my work is about, and this is who I'm going to be for the rest of my time and whatever. And there are phases where we feel that confusion, and there are phases of non-clarity, and then we feel like we're either losing it, or I'm not yet good enough, or haven't figured it out. But for what I can realize and learn from my own journey has been that my purpose here is to create, and I could have, I think, for me, being a woman is my north star, my guiding light in not just art, but just as a anything. Arts to Hearts as a women's platform. I'm very deeply, my personal experience in my life is so consumed as a woman's perspective that feels like a core. But I've also seen these phases where my some major experience, like losing my mom, or mm, growing up 10 years out, and or moving to another city or moving to another country, and I experience this whole lot of another world, and it starts to shape me, and then it starts to shape my work, and then my works gets twisted, refined, evolved, whatever that could be. So I feel like these are like how we see our work progress. So I want to know about how has your how did you find, and how has your work evolved conceptually in the sense of your purpose, and then how has your material, like how have you pushed that envelope of finding that creative freedom in when it comes to your own creativity, your creative material, your getting in the studio and like, oh, now I have to do this, oh no, but I'm like, there are things that this conversation that we keep doing, okay, you know what my work needs to look like.
Yeah, I think that there is this notion, certainly when you write an artist statement, that it's like, well, this is what my work is. And in fact, I have lots of different artist statements. And I think that's healthy because sometimes I write an artist statement for a series. Um, and a lot of times when you're applying to things as an artist, they'll want an artist statement specific to that series. And so I've gotten more and more comfortable with the fact that when I write an artist statement, that's true for this set of work at this time. And that's what it's true for. Now, I do have a more overarching general one that I try to use that's on my website and things like that. But I think that, I for a while I did photography and I would take photographs of my installations, and that was sort of a part of my practice. And um, then I was working intensively with political painting, and I was doing a lot of almost mural size works on canvas. And I just um, I just see it as an evolution. It's an artist statement is just a point in time, and I think if you can get comfortable with viewing it as a point in time, and you save your versions. This is a statement with this series. I have many versions on my computer, and that's okay. It should change over time if you are evolving.
And for me, I feel like it's like I personally see it as a puzzle. We at Arts to Arts, we also do a service of writing people's artist statement, and I myself, do a lot of writing. And whenever we even do these consultation sessions, and I'm like, okay, this is what you've told me, but you know what? When I hear this, this is what I can also see. Oh, could this also mean this? Could I also I feel like for even with my work, I painted something yesterday, and I shared it with my colleague, and I sent her my work, just just sharing it with someone that you feel safe and comfortable with. And and while it was just a morning sketch and something, and I was like, you know what, even though this wasn't like something I was doing, like like a serious work or something, but just this morning little work gave me so much of clarity of what is going within me. And there's another part, and I feel my purpose of what I'm doing, I feel so much more aligned, and I feel like I need to add this into my statement, I need to add this to my story. Like it's like I'm unpeeling these layers and then back adding them back, and like becoming this flower, whatever we are. And like it's like this. I'm like, oh my god, this is why I do. Okay, this is why I was interested. This is why I think this is why it's happening. So like I think it's exciting, but there's also this, for so long I felt a huge unrest because I didn't have that answer, and I felt like I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know where it's going to take me, I'm just wasting my time, am I trying to think too much? But when I found it, I was like, oh my God, this is it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there it is a journey. Your artist statement in writing actually is a really important part about being an artist, is writing to get that clarity. Now, I think I and every other artist probably listening to this is just like, oh my God, the artist statement. It's like we hate it. We totally hate it because you're trying to put in writing something that's visual. But I do think that there's a way in which when you write an artist statement and you start out with what is it do, Why does it matter? All of those kinds of questions. It's critical to ask yourself, and to ask yourself over and over, what cultural space does this exist in? Who is this for? What is my audience? And it changes over time.
Yeah. And I think something and that is, I think, one of the reasons we started putting out these services at Arts to Hearts was because even as an artist, even though I do this for other artists a lot of times, we as a team do this. I struggle a lot when it comes to my own self, because I feel like a lot of times as an artist, there's so many layers of who we are, and it is very hard for us to sometimes see ourselves objectively. And I really truly enjoy my sessions with artist statement sessions, because the questions we ask, it's like a brainstorming. And I'm like, okay, tell me something. When you're saying this word, do you think you're saying this because you want other people to read it, or you're saying this because it resonates with you? And more than often, it doesn't resonate with them. It's because they feel like, okay, I have to put a fancy word, or I have to look like a certain way. And a lot of time, it's about who you are than what other people want you to be. And it's like such a fun session, because I get to be that third person, and I'm looking at that person and their story and their art. And it's like, okay, we are having this conversation, and I'm asking them these questions, and so it's like you are here. And I think that is why a lot of us as artists struggle with our own statements, is because we are not able to see ourselves with third perspective. We're always within the waters instead of outside of the waters and doing that movement. So I think, yeah, I mean, but I think core of anything and everything, like, of how we are thinking, like how we are responding to ourselves, and are we ready to unpeel that layer? Okay, I can put myself out there. It does not matter what people would think of me, or what my work would be taking, or what would happen out of. As long as it is me, it counts and it matters.
Well, I think the other thing that in writing an artist statement is, I will read my artist statement and people will say, I understand that's what motivates your work, but that isn't actually how your work is experienced by the viewer. So sometimes when we write our artist statement, what you think the work is doing, actually your read it to a friend, or for example, or the services that you provide, because your work actually might be doing something different than what you see it is, and that's the moment. That's the teaching.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, I think as a practice of ourselves as artists is, I think personally for myself, I feel like the more I am, and I'm sure I'm going to ask this question to you, because you're way more experienced, and you've experienced life more than me. But I feel like as we're growing old, as our work is growing older with us, the process has become about actually going back to where we came from. In my own journey, I've realized, while I was very young, and I would spend a lot of my time around the same things in the same way that I'm doing today. But I left all of those things. I left my affinity towards these feminine objects, my culture and art, because I didn't feel, I loved it, but I knew that that is what wasn't expected out of me. That wasn't what people expected, what a good student, good woman, good successful career, successful person. So I became, we become what people are expected out, and society around us. And the moment we start to find a voice back, the journey of unlayering ourselves to from where we came, I think, at least I feel I am on that path. Like every day I'm shedding a layer and only finding one that I came from, that feels very, you know home to me. So what does that feel to you after 50 years? After so many years of making also?
Yeah, I definitely think that, as you age, you get a lot more comfortable with where you are. And that is, at aging, I think women are often viewed as, oh, aging, it's a terrible thing. And actually, I think it's the best time. And a lot of women actually bloom artistically in their 40s and 50s, because they kind of had to go through the 20s and 30s of living their life for somebody else. I mean, that's kind of, and that's true for a lot of women artists, is like you had to do the thing with the family, you had to take care of the kid, you had to do all the things to take care of everybody else. And it's like, okay, and I think younger women coming up, I don't think we are a reflection of our culture. We are a reflection of where we live, our religions, what our values are. So some of us may still feel obligated that we have to put everybody in front of ourselves. Um, but it's kind of like, okay, took care of that. Now I need to focus on who am I? And I think that's why you see a lot of women's art kind of bloom later, but it does bloom, we do evolve, and it's not too late.
It's never too late, I think. It's never too late.
It really isn't.
Okay, one last question before I let you go. Anyone who's listening to this episode right now, I think a lot of us, um, as women, I think specifically, most of our listeners are women. Um, a lot of us, I think we get caught up in this storm of, and I think a lot of times, I think this is also a storm that is of today, where we want to be everything and be ourselves, and we feel stuck and we feel overwhelmed, and there is a lot of self depreciation, and where we feel we are not doing enough, or feeling stuck in a moment and finding ourselves in a dark spot. What is your advice for them to, how can they navigate themselves? Would it be it as their own identity as a woman or their roles as artist? What is your advice?
I think what I did is I talked, I sort of alluded to the fact that I did see a therapist to get clear about what I wanted to prioritize in my life. Now, you don't have to see it, some folks are not into going to therapy, but seeing, talking to a trusted friend or talking to somebody in your religious circle or in a support group, talking through and writing through what you believe your priorities are right now and what you realistically can do. Because for some of us, we're going to have to, for a little while, we're going to have to pick. We can't do all 20. That doesn't mean you won't be able to do it later, but maybe you set a 6-month goal that for now, I'm going to do 15 minutes of art a day. Maybe I have to take care of a sick child or a sick parent, and I'm going to completely radically accept my life for what it is right now. Because if you radically accept your life, it opens up a lot of space for you to feel happiness because for this 6 months, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to be happy about it because I've chosen this. And then you move on and you're sort of like, all right, for the next 6 months, maybe I inch up my art making to 2 to 3 hours a week. Maybe I get to that point. And I'm going to balance it because I'm going to also, maybe I'm going to watch less Netflix, right? Or I'm going to be less on social media doom scrolling. I'm going to see if there's other areas of my life where I can be more efficient so I can really preserve my time for what matters. Because Netflix is the vortex, okay?
I agree. Yeah. No, I think conscious being intentional about and being okay with that intention and knowing that this isn't. I think another thing we oftentimes think that this is a reality and it's going to be forever. And I think we live in a changing reality, good and bad both.
Absolutely. It's just set short term goals, little goals, and achieve them and keep building on that. Little goals. Do not set some ridiculous goal and be like all disappointed. Set a goal that you can make and achieve it and feel good about it, celebrate it, and then take it to the next level. Baby steps, and you will build. It will work. You just have to build over time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Holly. It was amazing speaking to you. And I thank you so much for your kindness, for sharing so honestly, and for some I think truly incredible and honest advices that you've shared with us. But people who's looking listening to this episode, how can they find you, support you, look at your work, get in touch if they'd like? Just anything. If you have something upcoming, please take the stage and make sure that we can, how we can support you.
Sure. So my Instagram handle is Holly Wong Art. It's all one word, no spaces, Holly Wong Art. My website is hollywongart.com. Keep it simple. And so I have a show up right now at Ogden Contemporary in Utah, in the United States, called Emergence. And that's up through October 15th. And that is some large scale fiber installations, probably. And you'll see a lot of that on my Instagram account. I'm also in a two-person show at the Maui Arts and Cultural Center opening on September 12th, which will be fiber installations with sound and video as well. So those are some things that are coming up just off the cuff. And I'm excited to, I hope to see folks on Instagram, check me out. Um, I'm I'm here to be a part of the community and keep the conversation going.
Yes, and if I think for specifically, particularly for this episode, I'm sure there are a lot of great things that we've spoken about, a lot of great advices Holly has, shared with us. So if there's something particularly that has resonated with you, tag us, let us know, and know that it mattered, and we connected. And if you have a viewpoint, if you have an experience that you'd like to share with us, make sure you do, and let's keep this conversation going. Thank you so much. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon again.
Yes, thank you.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and everyone who's joined us for the first time, thank you so much for listening to the Arts to Hearts podcast. I hope I see you in the next episode. Thank you.